part of the legend. We will wipe the orcs from our door for the Empire! Total Warhammer!
It's been exactly 1 year since the launch of Total War Warhammer 3, arguably one of the most hyped games in the series ever, and the title which, at least as far as I know, aims to conclude the Warhammer series with a giant bang. Depending on who you talk to or what you love about this game, either a lot or very little has happened with Warhammer 3 since February 2022, and as you might know, there's been some controversy around this topic in particular. On this 1 year anniversary, I thought it was about time to revisit Warhammer 3. Check it out once more after just a bit over 365 days, talk about the controversies, and if the game is worth playing or still being hyped for right now. I also wanted to take this time to shout out some of my Warhammer friends here in the Total War community. And so, if you're into Warhammer 3 and want to watch a unique and new take on Let's Plays, head over to More Warpstone. They're currently playing a really fun campaign between two friends, where one is playing as Karl Franz and the Empire, and the other has taken on the role of Archeon the Everchosen, fighting each other for dominion of this vast world, and commenting on each other's campaigns. I really like their style, so do head over and show them some love.
Why is my reliability very low? What the f***?
Wars you got into?
I haven't entered any wars. What? This doesn't make any sense. Why does this always happen? I didn't declare war on anybody.
And finally, make sure to like this video and leave a comment if you enjoy what I do, and let's get right into it. First of all, let's talk about what Warhammer 3 actually is, because this can get complicated. The overall aim of the Total War Warhammer franchise was to create a complete world in the Warhammer universe. There are 3 available games, each one dealing with their own continent or part of this world. The first game deals with the center, or the world focusing on the Empire, the Dwarves, the Vampire Counts, and so on. In my opinion, this first game was actually my personal favorite of the 3. And the reason is simple. This old world of Warhammer is rather highly inspired by medieval and early modern Europe. We have 3 main human factions here: the Empire, Bretonnia, and Norska, basically copy-paste fantasy factions of the German Holy Roman Empire, the English and the French, and the Vikings, with Norska sounding not too different from Norway, or even Norsk, which means Norwegian in Norwegian. I just enjoy that the first game was a bit simpler, a bit less flashy, a bit more classic fantasy if you will, and a bit less disgusting than the rest, as Warhammer 2 really took things up a notch. And finally, the Warhammer 1 campaign is arguably the most traditional, having you fight the other factions on the map until a massive chaos horde arrives as a late game challenge, where you get to prove your faction's worth. Kinda like Attila, I guess. Warhammer 2 looks west, offering up some high elves and a myriad of tropical beasts, skeletons, and rat people. This too is a massive world, although one quite different from the first game. Here the more magical races take center stage, and I think it speaks for itself when the Tomb Kings faction, which is a bunch of undead skeletons running around, is arguably the second most humanoid faction after the High Elves. In addition, Warhammer 2 completely changed up Total War's campaign formula. For the base factions, most of the campaign evolved around paying attention to the Vortex, which had you run around the world collecting ritual resources, in order to finally take control of the Vortex. This also led up to a bunch of late game battles, but it was definitely a somewhat more detail-oriented campaign, for better or worse. It is of course a matter of taste in this regard which game you prefer of the 2 first ones, but I will say that Warhammer 2 had a secret up its sleeve. With Warhammer 2, Creative Assembly finally introduced Immortal Empires, a massive free update which combined the first and the second games into one giant campaign. With a whole buttload of DLC and new content over the course of almost 4 entire years, Warhammer 2 is probably CA's most and best supported title ever. This made the game so content rich that you could spend literally thousands of hours and never play every legendary lord, as I myself still find that playing the Empire was the only option. Another cool thing was that CA opted to update and improve upon some of the mechanics for the older factions coming from Warhammer 1, meaning that the Empire received a revamped Imperial system, for example. Finally, Warhammer 3 looks far eastward, and allows us to play as the icebound human faction Kislev, the heavily Chinese-inspired Cathay, and a whole lot of demons. I think Warhammer 3 comes in a close second to Warhammer 1 for me, as I do think these humanoid factions are really well made. and I can even appreciate some of the more demonic factions here. In my opinion, Warhammer 3 plays around with this map much more than any other game in this series, both in a foundational sense, when Cathay has an entire wall of one-city provinces to protect, and when it comes to its campaign, the Realms of Chaos. Warhammer 3 is all about fighting for or against chaos, and in a campaign setting, this means that portals will occasionally show up on the map, taking you to these otherworldly realms. While it is a visually impressive campaign, and one I like purely on the basis of it actually taking chances, and partially succeeding with, again, its impressive looks, it can feel a bit unwieldy, buggy, and a bit annoying if you don't like this much more railroaded style of campaign. And again, Warhammer 3's focus on Chaos factions, including the Nurgles, which I will just never understand why some people like, kinda turns this historical heart off somewhat. But what I just loved about Warhammer 3 was that it felt like Creative Assembly finally offered up a game engine for this series, which just felt right. Warhammer 3 just looks and feels so much better than the two other games, which also makes it so much more fun to play these older titles in the final and largest Total War campaign ever, Immortal Empires. Immortal Empires is the magnus opum of the Warhammer series, the entire world of each game combined into one giant campaign. And no matter whether you're a fan of the games or not, I think we can all agree that this is a marvelous achievement. This map is just astonishing to look at in every sense of the word, and harbors so many different environments all over, that it really feels like you're going on a grand imperial adventure no matter the faction. It's no understatement that a full campaign in Immortal Empires can demand hundreds of hours from you if you take your time. And honestly, I wish I was a true Warhammer nerd, because I can't imagine how awesome this must feel for those with a real investment in this universe. This entire series has been a good 6 years in the making when counting backwards to the release of the first game in 2016, and is therefore arguably the biggest Total War project ever. But as we know, it's been a year since the release of Warhammer 3 in particular, and things have happened since then. But let's deal with the launch version first. On release, gamers reported various bugs, things that just didn't work properly, and even though I originally found it exciting and innovative to have options to build towers on these maps, the towers have come to feel a bit more like a chore you need to think about, rather than an actual fun innovation. My favorite part of Warhammer 3 though, is a concept which has been a part and staple of every Warhammer game since the beginning, namely the focus on each faction as unique civilizations with highly varied and different mechanics. In Warhammer 3, the Ice Court of Kislev sees two factions from the same civilization fight over control of their religion and motherland, winning favor with the gods and the people for control. In Cathay, balancing yin and yang is vital to understanding how your armies work, and the Great Wuxing Compass is equally important to make use of, to give your faction the upper hand in various areas of the game. I also really enjoyed their trading caravans, which could travel all across the map essentially, for some faraway riches. The Chaos factions are different from each other as well, but often functions around sacrificing their enemies to their gods in various ways, poisoning their lands, and some can even teleport to their enemies. And even though I'm sure this is a lot of fun for some, I prefer the more grounded mechanics of the human factions. But like I said, this uniqueness between civilizations is a main appeal of the series, and I think it's a fantastic way of making each faction feel different and fun to play, meaning each campaign feels different from the last in a way Total Wars of old simply can't quite imitate. And I know I keep coming back to Warhammer 1 here, but it's because I still find those factions the most fun to play. Playing as the Empire is just so much fun because of their unique faction mechanics. You see, the Empire is actually a group of various human factions that share a bond. These are all part of a so-called empire, but in reality, it's just like a relatively weak Holy Roman Empire. As the Emperor, however, it's up to you to defend your Empire members from outside harm, and depending on how well you do, their allegiance to you and your imperial authority increases or decreases. In turn, this enables you to actually annex your member states, and after a while, become a fully fledged empire in control of every heartland city. Because the early modern medieval German setting is so clear, I just can't help but love it, and it's done so much better in this game ironically than in any historical Total War dealing with that time period. Additionally, Bretonnia has a really cool system of peasants working the land versus being drafted as soldiers. The more soldiers you recruit, the less people there are to work the fields. And so it mimics a feudal-based European society where waging war over long periods of time can actually be detrimental to your economy. These are just a few of the many systems in these games and in the Immortal Empires campaign, but they represent some of the best in my opinion. And if you ever wanted to just vibe with factions that at least in part represents human history and harbor some realism, then this is definitely where to look. Additionally, I really love the idea of outposts. Outposts are essentially a kind of barracks embassy you can build in allied settlements, which in turn allows you to recruit their units. You can even complete missions for these factions for more favor, which allows you to draw even more units from them. This is a fantastic addition to Warhammer, and kind of allows you to experience several and varied armor compositions with a single faction. A truly fantastic and revolutionary little feature that I think is just pure charming genius. Warhammer's main appeal is arguably in those battles though, and in the third installment, I dare say they're easily the most spectacular they've ever been. Whether you're seeing a giant-ass polar bear riding into battle in the midst of gunfire, giant Cathay spy balloons shooting flames across the battlefield, or just the sheer spectacle of the Great Wall itself, or of course those Realms of Chaos battles, I've never seen anything like this before. And again, those new visuals enhance the overall experience even further. I particularly am a fan of the new anti-aliasing systems, as Warhammer 3 just looks so much smoother and more appealing than the prior games. As always, legendary lords or other special units will be spewing out magic, and some factions way more than others. Since I'm more of a traditional player who prefers moment-to-moment tactics over what I see as something more of a spam-type gameplay, I have to say that parts of Warhammer 3 does feel too... I don't really know what the right word is. Warhammer can to me become too mired in the magic aspect, too focused on who can cast which spells where the fastest. And in this game, magic has a lot to say after all. If you don't use it right, a battle can have its tide turn quickly, and parts of me wish I could just disable spells or debuff type magic altogether, as I find it unpredictable and too arcadey. And I think it's in part because I'm more of a fan of low magic type fantasies, as I find those to be inherently more realistic. But that's just me of course, and I know that for a lot of people who play Warhammer, the spells are absolutely part of what makes it so much fun. Overall, if we account for the magic, I think the Warhammer 3 battles are some of the best in the series. They're fluid, they feel organic for the most part, as I find that they found a good middle ground between cinematic and functional combat between units, and I find things like cavalry charges to be absolutely deadly, which is not something you can always say for the older games, at least in terms of epic charges. However, Warhammer battles have one major flaw compared to previous Total War battles, and it comes down to unit abilities. No, I'm not talking magical abilities, but the lack of things like unit formations on a per unit basis, for example. For instance, it's not possible to put various spearmen in tactical formations that would benefit them against incoming attacks, and you can't have a bow and arrow unit switch to using fire arrows. What you instead have to do is recruit one bowman that shoots normal arrows, and another that exclusively uses fire arrows. It's a weird concept honestly, and I think it really hampers the sense of tactical maneuvering in the heat of battle. I also honestly think the maps could have used some more tailoring. It is perhaps obvious, but now that Warhammer 3 is more or less all about the magic and the spectacle, I find that there's too few open battles that has that sense of epicness around them, as most of them kinda seem similar to each other in layout, unless we're talking unique quest map battles for example. I just find that many battlefields that should be choke point battles rarely are, and I wish there were more special feeling battlefields, if that makes sense. And one last point, I always used to find siege battles awesome in prior Total Wars, and it's all about that sense of realism. But in Warhammer, the walls and streets are also just comically large sometimes, which again makes an aspect of Warhammer that should feel realistic much less immersive. In its 1 year of release, Warhammer has received 3 main DLC packs, not including Immortal Empires. These are the Blood and Gore pack, the Ogre Kingdoms, the latter which came out right after the game's release by the way, and the Champions of Chaos pack. The first and last of these came out at the same time, and the Blood for the Blood God pack is hardly a DLC in my mind, since it's purely a cosmetic feature that should have been in the game from the get-go. If we also include Immortal Empires, a free update, all of these packs were released by August 24 of the same year, meaning by now, it's been a good 7 months since we last received anything for Warhammer 3. That is a shockingly long time for a game of this size and investment, and has created some controversy in the community. Now it must be said that name-calling, harassment, and insults are never okay, and I do take a hard and firm stance against that. But constructive criticism should always be allowed, and I think in CA's case, Many people are simply upset about the lack of information coming from the devs about upcoming content. I personally find that this is a CA problem in general actually. The fans wait a long time to hear about future content or even future games, even though I'm fairly sure CA themselves know what's up in the not too distant future. Either way, the unacceptable harassment and clamor, at least in part, prompted CA's game director Rich Aldrich to post a video about the near future of Warhammer 3, and at the same time warn against the more bad faith part of the community. In short, fans can be rabid, which is never okay, but at the same time, I wish CA could be a bit more open about their plans, because I think what riles people up in the first place is radio silence. Either way, apart from Champion of Chaos and Immortal Empires being the last major content drop, Warhammer 3 has been given several patches afterwards, and it's been making the game a little bit better every time. I especially like the return of certain 10 building slot cities, Immortal Empires endgames in multiplayer, landmarks, actual better AI depending on difficulty levels, and having the Ultimate Crisis endgame mode available. Apart from content from CA themselves though, Warhammer 3 has for the past year seen a truly amazing amount of mods, and since they're free to use and easy to download through the Steam Workshop, I really think we can count them as part of Warhammer 3's offerings. I for one definitely use mods whenever I can to increase immersion, and I really want to give a special shout out to some of my favorite mods right here. One of my favorite mods is the Guns, Smoke, and Spectacle mod, which drastically enhances the look of gunfire. Now you can actually get a super sweet smoke and spark effect, and looking from above gives that amazing line infantry smoke effect that you missed from Empire at Napoleon. Just absolutely beautiful work there. Second is an all-time necessity of mine, namely the Grand Order of the Reichsguard, which provides some absolutely sick lore-friendly units to the Empire. Essentially we're given more dismounted knights, and I can't help but feel like they should have been in the game to begin with. Unit mods like these are aplenty on the workshop and for more factions than the Empire, but since they're kind of my go-to faction, Empire mods are thusly my go-to as well. Then we have smaller but awesome mods like reloading animations or detail mods like providing units with actual quivers, and of course the massive SFO mod, which is more of an overhaul with a ton of gameplay value changes. I also personally use the Ultimate Lighting mod, which makes each battlefield look more realistic and beautiful, and I can't in good faith end this section without mentioning Crisis on Campaign, which somehow managed to add a population and supply mechanic to Warhammer 3, which is just absolutely fantastic, and adds an entirely new sense of depth and strategy to the game. Oh, and lastly, one of the awesomest mods though has to be the Total War Millennium Modern Warfare mod, which actually provides a last tier of units for the Empire that includes World War I inspired units. Now this mod not only contains things like rifle infantry and giant artillery, but also actual tanks and even airships. It's a fantastic showcase of what's possible to make in Warhammer 3, and I even think it's relatively lore friendly in terms of development of the Empire in the centuries to come. Realistic for this world or not, I think it's a fantastic mod, and even though there's a ton of mods I haven't mentioned in this video, I highly recommend checking all of these out. In other words, even though Warhammer 3 hasn't changed that much since launch, incremental changes of the game itself has made it much more appealing. For me, Immortal Empires is a complete game changer as I can finally once again play my dearest Empire. Small patches here and there have made the game feel better than it did at launch, and the mods themselves just enhance the experience so much more than the devs could ever manage by themselves. As always then, the passionate Total War modding community comes through, and helps to elevate yet another Total War game. When it comes down to it, Warhammer 3 is objectively a much more fun and engaging experience than it was a year ago, if not for the mods themselves. But I'd say about 70% of this fun is owed to the Immortal Empires update, if you have all 3 games of course. Even though I'm sure Warhammer 3 will see content drops for the next 3 to 4 years, I'm personally extremely excited to see what else EA has in store for us in terms of new games. As a historical fan first, I can't outright recommend it if you live for realism and tactical warfare, with those deeper elements and historically minded accuracy. But if you've been on the fence on Warhammer 3, and especially if you already own 1 and 2, then I think Warhammer 3 is a no-brainer 1 year later, and doubly so if you live and breathe the Warhammer universe, as this complete package is something of a one-in-a-lifetime event. Let me know your thoughts on Warhammer 3 and the series as a whole in the comments below, like this video and sub to the channel, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Hear me now, brave men! Brave Reichlanders, hear me! We must be ready to push them back, thrust them into the sea, in defense of the Empire!
Cheers!